Imagine this. You wake up in the middle of the night to a strange humming sound coming from the sky. Outside your window, bright light pulses with such intensity that it penetrates even through thick curtains. Your heart pounds frantically, and electricity seems to hang in the air. This is exactly what happened to the Carter family from a small town in Arizona on October 13, 2019. What happened next changed their lives forever and became one of the most mysterious abduction cases in modern UFO history. Michael Carter, a 36-year-old software engineer, his wife Sarah, a 34-year-old elementary school teacher, and their two sons, 10-year-old Jacob and 7-year-old Ethan, lived a quiet, measured life in the suburbs of Flagstaff. Their house, built in the late 90s, was located on the outskirts of town, offering a stunning view of Arizona's desert landscapes and the starry sky, which was particularly bright in these parts due to minimal light pollution. The family had moved to Arizona 5 years earlier from overcrowded Los Angeles, tired of urban hustle and smog. Michael worked remotely for a tech company in Silicon Valley, developing software for satellite navigation systems. His work often required understanding orbital mechanics and space technologies, which only intensified his long-standing passion for astronomy. Sarah taught at the local John Muir Elementary School, where she was known for her innovative teaching methods and ability to connect with every child. Colleagues often marveled at her intuitive understanding of children. She seemed to sense what was going on in their heads and hearts. This trait, which Sarah considered simple pedagogical intuition, would later take on completely different significance. Jacob, the oldest son, was a typical 10-year-old boy, curious, active, but not showing any particular academic abilities. He was more interested in sports and video games than studies, which sometimes frustrated his parents. Ethan, the younger one, was the complete opposite of his brother, a quiet, dreamy child who could spend hours drawing or building complex constructions with building blocks. Michael had always been interested in astronomy. Their house had a Celestron telescope, an 8-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain reflector model that Michael had bought for his 35th birthday. On weekends, the whole family loved stargazing. Michael patiently explained constellation names to the children, told them about planets and their moons, about distant galaxies and nebulae. Sarah often joked that her husband knew more about constellations than about what was happening in their own house. But actually, she secretly took pride in Michael's enthusiasm and how he passed on his love of space to the children. Thanks to their father, Jacob could easily find the Big Dipper and Polaris in the sky, while Ethan enjoyed listening to stories about black holes and the possibility of life on other planets. Their house was located on Pine Ridge Street, in a quiet neighborhood where most lots were quite large and neighbors lived far from each other. This provided the family with the privacy they valued, especially during astronomical observations. The nearest neighbor, 70-year-old Vietnam War veteran Frank Rodriguez, lived 300 meters away and shared Michael's interest in the night sky. That Saturday, October 12th, the family gathered in the yard after dinner as usual. The day was special. Michael had received a new eyepiece set for the telescope that was supposed to provide even better image quality. The children were excitedly looking at Saturn's rings through the telescope, which were particularly well visible that evening thanks to the clear atmosphere. "Dad, is it true that there are moons with oceans there?" Ethan asked, examining the ringed planet. Michael smiled and began telling him about Enceladus and Titan, Saturn's moons where life could indeed exist. Sarah was making hot chocolate in the kitchen at that time, occasionally looking out the window and admiring the family scene. The air was cool and clean, a typical autumn night in Arizona. The temperature held around 15 degrees Celsius. A light breeze blew from the west, bringing the aromas of desert plants. The sky was exceptionally clear, without a single cloud, and the Milky Way stretched above them in a bright silver arc. Nothing foretold the nightmare that was to begin in just a few hours. The Carter family spent that evening in complete happiness and harmony, not suspecting that their lives would change dramatically by morning. Around 1:30 in the morning, Michael was awakened by a strange sound. His eyes opened instantly, as if some inner alarm had torn him from deep sleep. At first, he thought it might be a military aircraft. Luke Air Force Base was nearby, and sometimes night exercises disturbed the peace of local residents. Over the years of living in Arizona, the family had grown accustomed to the periodic roar of jet engines cutting through the night silence. But this sound was completely different. The low-frequency hum seemed to penetrate into the very bones, creating the sensation that not only the air was vibrating, but the space around them as well. Window glass trembled in the frames with a barely audible ringing, and wooden furniture in the bedroom made quiet creaking sounds, as if the house had been seized by an invisible earthquake. Michael sat up in bed and listened. The sound was not constant. It pulsated at regular intervals, intensifying approximately every 3 seconds and then weakening. The frequency was so low that internal organs felt it rather than ears hearing it. Michael's head began to ache, not a sharp pain, but rather a sensation of pressure, as if the atmospheric pressure around the house had suddenly changed. He carefully got out of bed, trying not to wake Sarah, and tiptoed to the window. Michael slowly pulled back the curtain and looked outside. What he saw made his heart skip several beats and his breathing stop momentarily. Above their house, at a height of approximately 50 meters, a triangular-shaped object hung motionless. It was enormous, by Michael's quick estimate, about 30 meters wide and 20 meters long. The object's surface was dark grey, almost black, but didn't absorb light completely. Rather, it seemed made of some material that barely noticeably shimmered, like metal with a very thin layer of oil. Around the object's perimeter, lights of an unusual blue-white color slowly blinked. These lights were not harsh or blinding. On the contrary, they emitted a soft, almost hypnotic glow that created bizarre shadows on the ground below. Michael counted 12 such lights, positioned with mathematical precision along the triangle's edges. But most striking was the powerful beam of light pouring from the center of the object's lower part. This beam was not ordinary white light. It had a slight golden tint and seemed almost material, as if made of glowing liquid. The beam slowly scanned the area around the house, moving in a strict geometric pattern, first in a circle, then in a spiral, then in a circle again. When the beam passed over the ground, Michael could see how it illuminated every blade of grass, every pebble with amazing clarity. Moreover, it seemed that the light penetrated through objects. Michael could distinguish tree roots underground, water pipes under the lawn. Even the house foundation was visible through the soil. "Sarah, wake up," Michael whispered, not taking his eyes off what was happening outside the window. His voice trembled with tension and fear, but his wife didn't react. He turned to her and discovered that she was lying in exactly the same position she had fallen asleep in, on her right side, facing the wall, with her hand under the pillow. Sarah was breathing very slowly and deeply, as if immersed in an unnaturally deep sleep. Michael approached her and noticed that her breathing was not just slow, it was rhythmic with the same frequency as the pulsations of the sound outside. 3 seconds inhale, 3 seconds exhale, in exact correspondence with the hum coming from the sky. Panic began to grip Michael. He tried to wake Sarah, gently shook her shoulder, but she didn't react. Her skin was warm, her pulse could be felt, but she was as if in a coma. Michael tried speaking louder, even turned on the nightlight near the bed, but nothing could bring his wife out of this strange state. Then he rushed to the children's room. Jacob and Ethan were sleeping each in their own bed, and the picture was the same: deep, unnatural sleep, slow rhythmic breathing, complete immobility. Michael tried to wake first the older son, then the younger, but the result was identical: no reaction. At that moment, Michael noticed another strangeness. In the children's room there were several electronic toys with LED displays. Usually they showed time in green digits, but now all the displays were blinking chaotically, showing a meaningless set of symbols. The digital clock on Ethan's bedside table showed 88 to 88, and Jacob's toy robot, which should have been turned off, was making quiet electronic sounds and blinking with all its LEDs. Michael looked out the children's room window and saw that the triangular object was now directly above the house. The light beam became wider and brighter, and the house was completely within its zone of action. At that moment, Michael felt a strange sensation. His own movements became slowed, as if he were moving underwater. He tried to return to the bedroom, but each step was given with enormous difficulty. The air around him seemed to become denser, and time to flow slower. Michael realized that something was happening to him as well. His consciousness was beginning to cloud. Thoughts were becoming viscous and blurred. As a last act of resistance, he tried to reach the phone in the bedroom to call for help. But when he picked up the receiver, there was not the familiar dial tone, but the same pulsating sound that was coming from the sky. Michael realized they were completely cut off from the outside world. Returning to the bedroom, Michael discovered that the light outside had become brighter and more intense. The golden radiance now penetrated even through thick curtains, flooding the room with soft, pulsating light. The hum intensified to such an extent that it became almost inaudible, as if the sound frequency had gone beyond human perception, but the impact on the body only strengthened. Michael felt his own consciousness beginning to cloud. At first it was like mild dizziness, as with a sudden change in altitude. Then the sensations became stranger, time seemed to slow down, and the space around began to distort. The bedroom walls seemed sometimes closer, sometimes farther, as if the room was breathing. He tried to sit on the bed next to Sarah, but discovered that his legs no longer obeyed him. Not that they were numb, rather, the connection between brain and body became intermittent, like poor radio communication. Michael could think clearly, but controlling his body was becoming increasingly difficult. The last thing he remembered clearly was how the beam of light passed right through the wall of their house, as if it were made not of brick and concrete, but of fog. The physical laws that Michael had studied in university and applied in his work suddenly stopped working. The light materialized inside the room without leaving any holes in the wall, without causing any damage to the building's structure. This light was not just illumination, it was alive, intelligent, purposeful. Michael felt the rays surround him, causing no pain, but creating a sensation of weightlessness. His body seemed to dissolve, lose density, become part of the light itself. At the same time, consciousness remained clear. Michael could think, but could not control what was happening. The moment the light completely enveloped him, Michael sensed the presence of other minds. These were not voices or thoughts in the usual sense, rather, direct knowledge that he was not alone, that someone was watching him, studying him. These presences were calm, curious, but not hostile. There was a sense of ancient wisdom, knowledge accumulated over millennia. The last earthly sensation Michael remembered was the view of the bedroom from above. He seemed to be rising toward the ceiling, seeing his own body and the bodies of his wife and children lying motionless. Then his consciousness was carried somewhere far from home, from Earth, to a place that existed beyond ordinary space and time. The following memories were fragmentary and confused, like dreams that are only partially remembered. Michael remembered the sensation of movement, but not ordinary physical displacement, rather, travel through dimensions that the human brain cannot fully comprehend. There was a feeling that he was moving through the very structure of reality, seeing it from within. He remembered bright white light that did not blind the eyes but somehow penetrated directly into the brain, carrying information with it. This was not visual information in the usual sense, rather, direct transmission of knowledge, concepts, images directly into consciousness. Michael saw star systems, distant galaxies, forms of life that had evolved according to completely different principles than Earth biology. There were sounds, not words, but rather melodies or mathematical sequences that carried meaning without using familiar language. These melodies told stories of millions of years of evolution, about civilizations that had achieved harmony with the cosmos, about technologies based not on conquering nature, but on cooperating with it. Michael remembered the sensation of learning, not forced, but organic, as if his consciousness was expanding naturally, accepting new concepts that had previously been inaccessible to human understanding. He learned about the nature of time as a multidimensional structure, about consciousness as a fundamental force of the universe, about how matter and energy are merely different manifestations of a single cosmic substance. At times, images of home, family, Earth arose in his consciousness, but not as memories, but as part of a larger picture showing humanity's place in the universe. Michael understood that his family was going through something important, that this was not coincidence, but part of a larger process connected to the evolution of human consciousness. At certain moments, he felt the presence of Sarah and the children near him, although he could not see them in the usual sense. Their consciousnesses were connected, united in a single network through which they exchanged not words but direct sensations and knowledge. The family was experiencing this journey together, supporting each other at a level deeper than physical presence. Michael remembered the moment when his consciousness touched something enormous and ancient, the collective mind of a civilization existing for millions of years. In this contact there was no fear or aggression, only infinite compassion and desire to help a younger race take the next step in evolution. He understood that humanity stood on the threshold of great changes, and his family had been chosen as one of the bridges between the old and new eras. When the search team found the Carter family, exactly 4 days and 16 hours had passed since their disappearance. They were discovered 25 kilometers from home, in a desert area called Deadwood Mesa, where none of them had ever been. All 4 were lying in a perfect circle on reddish sand, dressed in the same clothes they had worn to bed on Saturday evening. Their car remained in the garage, keys lay on the bedside table, and the house doors were locked from the inside with all locks engaged. The search began the very next day after the disappearance, on Sunday morning. The first to become concerned was Michael's colleague, David Chen, head of the development department. They had an important video conference scheduled with clients from Japan at 9 in the morning, and Michael never missed important meetings without warning. When David couldn't reach Michael on either his work or personal phone, he decided to stop by his house. Simultaneously, the principal of John Muir Elementary School, Mrs. Eleanor Hatcher, was surprised by Sarah's absence. The teacher was supposed to conduct morning classes with first graders, and the day before she had enthusiastically told colleagues about a new solar system study project she planned to start on Monday. Sarah was known for her responsibility and never absent without notice. When both David and Mrs. Hatcher arrived at the Carters' house around noon on Sunday, they discovered a strange scene. The house looked completely normal, the lawn was mowed, mail lay in the box, the car stood in the garage, but no one answered the doorbell. David walked around the house, looking through windows, but saw no signs of life. The strangest thing was that lights were on in several rooms of the house, including the children's room. On the kitchen table stood 4 cups with remains of hot chocolate that apparently had not been finished. The telescope in the yard was set up and pointed at the sky, and next to it lay an astronomical chart open to October constellations. David and Mrs. Hatcher called the police. Officer Robert Garcia, a patrol officer with 20 years of experience, arrived half an hour later. He carefully examined the area and found no signs of struggle, break-in, or coercion. Doors and windows were locked from the inside, the alarm hadn't triggered, the car was in place with all keys. Inside the house, everything also looked normal. The beds were neatly made, but body impressions remained on the sheets, as if people had simply vanished right from their beds. In the bathroom, 4 toothbrushes were damp, indicating that the family had prepared for sleep on Saturday evening. The clothes they had worn during the day were neatly folded on chairs. Officer Garcia was particularly puzzled by the state of electronics in the house. All digital clocks showed different times, with some displaying impossible combinations such as 25 to 61 or 99 to 99. The television was on, but showed only static interference instead of programs. Michael's computer was running, but the screen displayed only chaotic symbols that didn't resemble any known language or code. By Sunday evening, a full-scale search operation was organized. Coconino County Sheriff Jim McDonald personally headed the search. Local volunteers, search and rescue teams from neighboring counties, National Guard helicopters, and even specially trained search dogs were involved. The dogs, known for their effectiveness in such cases, behaved strangely. They would sniff around the house, then begin circling the yard restlessly, whining and refusing to go further. Experienced dog handler Thomas Wilson, who had worked with these dogs for more than 10 years, was puzzled by their behavior. They sense a trail, but can't understand which direction it leads, he explained to the sheriff. Search operations were conducted methodically and professionally. The territory was divided into sectors and searched square by square. Helicopters scanned the area from the air using thermal imaging and powerful searchlights. Volunteers combed through every trail, every ravine within a 50-kilometer radius of the house on foot. All hospitals within a 200-kilometer radius were checked. Perhaps the family had been in an accident and taken to a medical facility without documents. Staff at all motels, gas stations, and restaurants on major roads were questioned. Relatives and friends of the family in other states were contacted. Perhaps the Carters had suddenly decided to visit someone. Frank Rodriguez, the family's neighbor, told police he had seen strange lights in the sky on Saturday night. "I couldn't sleep because of arthritis," explained the 70-year-old veteran. "I went out to smoke on the porch around 2 in the morning and saw some lights over the Carter's house. I thought maybe it was a helicopter, but the sound was somehow different. And then the lights just disappeared." Frank's testimony interested investigators, but initially it was categorized as eyewitness evidence, which is often inaccurate, especially in dark conditions. Moreover, no other witnesses to the strange lights could be found. The nearest neighbors lived too far away. On the third day of searching, the FBI joined the investigation. Agent Marcus Weller, a specialist in missing persons cases, arrived from the Phoenix office. He carefully studied the house, questioned all the family's acquaintances, and concluded that this was not an ordinary disappearance. "There are no signs that the family planned to go anywhere," he stated at a press conference. "And there are no signs of coercion or violence." The media quickly picked up the story. Local news channels began daily reports on the search progress. The Carter family was an exemplary American family, hard-working parents, good children, active members of the local community. Their disappearance touched hearts across the country. On the 4th day of searching, something happened that changed the entire character of the investigation. A group of volunteers led by Bill Thompson, a local ranch owner, was examining a remote section of desert in the Deadwood Mesa area. This location was on the list for checking, but they only got to it on the 4th day because it was quite far from the Carter's house and was difficult to access. Bill was the first to notice something unusual. "I saw some kind of spot on the sand," he recounted later. The sand was a different color, as if it had been burned or irradiated with something. Approaching closer, the searchers discovered a perfect circle about 10 meters in diameter, inside which the sand had a darker, almost black shade. In the center of this circle lay the Carter family. Michael was the first to regain consciousness. This happened 18 hours and 23 minutes after they were brought to the hospital. He opened his eyes slowly, as if surfacing from ocean depths, and lay for several minutes simply trying to understand where he was and what had happened to him. The hospital room ceiling seemed unfamiliar and strange to him. Familiar sounds, the air conditioner humming, footsteps in the corridor, distant voices were perceived distortedly, as if coming from far away or through water. Michael tried to sit up but discovered that his movements were slow and uncertain, as after a long sleep or anesthesia. Memories returned slowly, in fragments, like shards of a broken mirror. First he remembered only home, Saturday evening, stargazing with the children. Then images of strange light began to surface, sensations of flight, visions of other worlds. But these memories were so unreal that Michael initially took them for very vivid dreams. "Where is my family?" These were the first words he spoke. His voice was hoarse and weak, as if he hadn't spoken for several days. Nurse Maria Gonzalez, who was on duty that shift, immediately called the attending physician, Dr. James Patel, a neurologist with 15 years of experience, was amazed by the patient's sudden awakening after such a long period of immobility. "Your family is safe, Doctor," Patel assured him. "They are here, in the hospital, in neighboring rooms. Tell me, do you remember what happened to you?" Michael tried to concentrate, but there was a strange emptiness in his head. He remembered Saturday evening up to a certain point, and then a gap. The next clear memory was waking up in the hospital room. Between these moments was only a vague jumble of images that could have been either memories or dreams. "I remember light," Michael said slowly, "very bright light, and a journey. But this can't be real, Doctor." Patel recorded every word. In his practice, there had been no cases where an entire family was simultaneously in a state of inexplicable coma and then began to regain consciousness. Medical tests showed that the patients were fine, but their condition didn't fit into any known disease category. 3 hours after Michael, Sarah woke up. Her awakening was even more dramatic. She sat up sharply in bed, eyes wide open, and looked around for several seconds with an expression of extreme amazement. Then she covered her face with her hands and quietly began to cry. It was so beautiful, she whispered through tears. Such an incredibly beautiful place, and they were so kind. The nurse tried to calm her, but Sarah continued talking about them, about beings who, according to her, had cared for the family all this time. She described them as tall, graceful, with large eyes full of compassion. "They showed me such things," Sarah said. "Other worlds, other forms of life. I never thought the universe could be so amazing, Doctor." Patel was puzzled by the similarity of descriptions given by the spouses. Usually with collective hallucinations or psychoses, eyewitness accounts differ significantly from each other. But Michael and Sarah were telling about the same experience, using different words but describing identical details. Jacob woke up next, 2 hours later. The 10-year-old boy was surprisingly calm for a child who had spent several days in uncertainty. He didn't cry, didn't demand explanations. On the contrary, he seemed peaceful and even happy. "They taught me to see numbers," he told Dr. Patel. "Before, math was difficult, but now I understand how everything is connected. They showed me that numbers aren't just symbols, but living things." The boy began drawing complex geometric figures on a sheet of paper. His drawings amazed with their precision and mathematical beauty. Dr. Patel, who had a physics degree in addition to his medical education, recognized fractals and multi-dimensional projections in Jacob's drawings, concepts usually studied in university. Ethan, the youngest son, woke up last. The 7-year-old boy was more disoriented than the others, but his first words surprised everyone. "When will we go back home to the Star People?" When the family fully regained consciousness and was moved to a shared room, their reaction was unanimous, complete absence of fear or traumatic experiences. On the contrary, they seemed changed for the better, wiser, more harmonious. An amazing connection had been established between family members. They often knew what each other was thinking, could communicate almost without words. The doctors conducted a complete medical examination. The results were not just astonishing, they were medically impossible. Despite the fact that the family had spent for days in the desert without food and water, they showed not the slightest signs of dehydration or exhaustion. On the contrary, their bodies functioned better than before the disappearance. Blood tests showed perfect indicators across all parameters. Hydration levels were optimal, electrolyte balance was normal, vitamin and mineral content was above average. Moreover, some chronic health problems had improved in all family members. Sarah's lower back pain, which had tormented her for 5 years after Ethan's birth, had completely disappeared. MRI showed that damaged discs in her spine had somehow regenerated to perfect condition. The chronic asthma of the youngest son, which required constant use of an inhaler, had completely receded. His lungs functioned like those of a completely healthy child. Michael's myopia, which had developed in his teenage years, had disappeared. He had worn glasses for more than 20 years, but now his vision was perfect. Jacob's arm fracture, received a month ago in a bicycle fall, had healed. The bone had mended faster and stronger than usually happens in children his age. But the strangest discovery was the scars. Each family member had small, perfectly circular scars on their bodies with a diameter of exactly 5 millimeters. They were so identical that they seemed made with a high-precision instrument. Michael's scar was located on his left forearm, approximately 15 centimeters from the wrist. Sarah's was behind her right ear, in a place usually hidden by hair. Jacob's was on the back of his head, also under his hair, and Ethan's was on the inner side of his left ankle. The scars looked completely healed, as if they were several months or even years old, although the family had been absent for only 4 days. The edges were smooth, with no signs of inflammation or infection. The center of each scar had a slightly depressed shape, but the skin there was smooth and healthy. Dermatologist Dr. Elizabeth Crawford, whom the Carters consulted, had never seen anything like it in 20 years of practice. "These markings don't resemble anything known in medicine," she told colleagues. "This is not the result of trauma, not a surgical incision, not a burn. The tissue in the scar areas is completely healthy, but has a different cellular structure than the surrounding skin." Upon closer examination under a microscope, it became clear that the scar tissue was not simply healed, it had been regenerated by some unknown method. The cells were younger and healthier than surrounding tissues, and their DNA showed signs of optimization, as if the genetic code had been edited to improve functions. Even stranger was that the scars sometimes began to glow faintly in the dark. This luminescence was barely visible to the naked eye, but when using special equipment it was clearly recorded. The light was cold, blue-white, pulsating at a frequency of approximately once per second. Spectral analysis conducted at the University of Arizona laboratory showed that the light had an unusual wavelength, 450 nanometers, corresponding to deep blue color in the visible spectrum. But what made this discovery truly mysterious was that this wavelength does not occur in natural biological processes. Dr. Robert Steinberg, a leading specialist in bioluminescence from the California Institute of Technology, was invited for consultation. In nature, bioluminescence usually occurs in the green or yellow range, he explained. Blue luminescence of such intensity and purity requires very specific chemical processes that are not characteristic of the human body. Research showed that the luminescence intensified at certain moments. The scars glowed brighter during the family's sleep, especially during REM sleep, when the most vivid dreams occur. They also reacted to the emotional state of their bearers during strong emotions, both positive and negative. The intensity of the glow increased. But most striking was that the scars of all 4 family members glowed synchronously. When the family was near each other, their scars pulsed in unison, creating the sensation that they were connected by an invisible network. Even when family members were in different rooms, synchronization was maintained, leading scientists to assume the presence of some unknown type of connection. Attempts to take tissue samples for more detailed analysis were unsuccessful. When doctors tried to perform a biopsy, it turned out that the scar tissue possessed an amazing ability to regenerate. Any damage healed within a few hours, without forming new scars. Cells in these areas divided and restored themselves dozens of times faster than usual. The family experienced no discomfort from the presence of these markings. On the contrary, they said the scars gave them a sense of connection with each other and with something greater. "It's like a constant reminder that we are no longer alone in the universe," Sarah explained to one of the doctors. In the following weeks, family members gradually began to recover memories of what had happened during those 4 days. The process was slow and sometimes painful. Memory returned in waves, often during sleep, in the form of unusually vivid and detailed dreams that felt more real than ordinary life. Michael was the first to begin restoring details of his experience. Memories came to him gradually, usually in the early morning, in the state between sleep and wakefulness. He told Sarah about a large room with curved walls that didn't just glow with soft blue light, but seemed made of light itself. The wall material was incomprehensible. It wasn't solid in the usual sense, but wasn't gaseous either. Touching the wall, one could feel a light vibration, warmth, and something else, as if the wall were alive. The air in that place was amazing. It was warm, around 22 degrees, with perfect humidity. But most importantly, it had a special smell, sweet and pleasant, similar to ozone after a thunderstorm, but with notes of something floral and unfamiliar. This smell, as Michael explained, created a feeling of complete calm and safety. There were no ordinary sounds there, he recounted. No mechanical noises, no voices in the usual sense. But there was music, not what you hear with your ears, but what you feel with your whole body. Harmonies that resonated with heartbeat, with breathing, with thoughts. The room where they were located was enormous. Michael estimated its dimensions at several hundred meters in length and width, with a dome-shaped ceiling rising high above. But the strangeness was that space there didn't obey ordinary geometry. One could walk in one direction and eventually arrive at the same place, but from the other side. The angles there were not right angles, but softly curved, creating the sensation of being inside a living organism. Sarah remembered the beings in more detail. They were tall, about 2 meters in height, but their proportions differed from human ones. The limbs were long and graceful, fingers thin and elongated. Their skin had a greyish-blue tint with a slight pearlescent sheen that shimmered with movement. The skin seemed translucent. Through it were visible not blood vessels, but networks of light pulsating in a rhythm that resembled a heartbeat, but was slower and more measured. The faces of these beings were elongated, with high foreheads and fine features, but most striking were their eyes, large, dark, occupying a significant part of the face. In these eyes was bottomless depth, ancient wisdom, and infinite compassion. When they looked at me, Sarah recounted, I felt that they saw not only my body, but my soul, my thoughts, my fears and dreams. And in their gaze there was no judgment, only understanding and love. Most amazing was that these beings communicated without words. Their thoughts were somehow transmitted directly into human consciousness. This wasn't telepathy in the usual sense, rather, direct exchange of concepts, images, emotions. When a being spoke, a person didn't hear words but understood meaning with absolute clarity. They explained to us who they were, Sarah remembered. Their race is very ancient. They have been traveling between stars for millions of years. Their civilization developed differently than ours. Instead of conquering nature, they learned to cooperate with it, to become part of it. Their technologies are based not on mechanics, but on consciousness and harmony with cosmic forces. The children remembered fewer technical details, but their memories were more emotionally rich. Jacob recounted that the beings were incredibly patient and kind. They didn't coerce, didn't hurry, didn't force. Every action was accompanied by explanation, every procedure by care for human comfort. They showed me how numbers work, the 10-year-old boy recounted with adult seriousness. Not just how to count, but how numbers live, how they're connected to each other, how they create forms and structures in the universe. I saw mathematics as a living system where each number has its own personality and purpose. The beings showed Jacob 3-dimensional models of mathematical concepts that he could study, rotate, take apart. He saw how simple numbers form complex structures, how geometry creates beauty, how mathematical laws govern planetary motion and the growth of living organisms. Ethan remembered journeys. The beings led him through long corridors of the ship, whose walls were like living screens. On these screens unfolded scenes from the life of various planets and civilizations. The 7-year-old boy saw worlds covered with crystalline forests where trees were made of precious stones and sang in the wind. He saw ocean planets where intelligent life evolved underwater, creating cities from coral and algae. The star people showed me a planet where beings of pure light live, Ethan recounted. They don't have bodies like us, but can take any form. And a planet where time flows backward, their people are born old and get younger every day. The family also remembered medical procedures, but they weren't painful or frightening. The beings carefully studied their bodies, but did so with the greatest caution and care. Each examination was accompanied by explanations of what was being done and why. They said they study us to help, Michael recalled. Humanity stands on the threshold of great changes, and they need to understand how our bodies and minds can adapt to new conditions. They don't take anything against our will, on the contrary, they give us gifts. These gifts included not only healing diseases and improving physical condition. The beings made changes to the family's DNA, activating dormant sections of genetic code that should have turned on in humanity after hundreds or thousands of years of evolution. They explained that the human genome contains potential for abilities we don't even suspect, Sarah recounted. But these abilities are blocked because humanity wasn't ready for them yet. Now the time has come. The family also remembered the moment when they were shown Earth from space. This wasn't an ordinary view of the planet, but something deeper. They saw energy fields surrounding the planet, streams of consciousness connecting all living beings, networks of light connecting Earth with other worlds. Earth is not just a planet, Michael explained. It's a living being, part of a galactic network of consciousness. And humanity plays an important role in this network. We must learn to live in harmony not only with each other, but with the planet and with the entire universe. The beings also showed the family the future, not as inevitable fate, but as possibilities. They saw a world where people had developed telepathic abilities and could communicate directly through consciousness. A world where diseases and aging were conquered not through medicines, but through understanding the energetic nature of the body. A world where people traveled between stars not in metal ships, but using the power of consciousness. But they warned us, Sarah added. This bright path is not guaranteed. Humanity can choose another road, the path of destruction and self-annihilation. The choice is ours. The culmination of their stay on the ship was a ceremony the family described as initiation. All four were placed in special crystalline chambers filled with glowing liquid. This liquid wasn't water, it was warm, luminous, and breathing in it was easier than breathing air. In this liquid I felt connection with the entire universe, Michael recounted. I was myself, but simultaneously was part of something infinitely greater. I understood the thoughts of stars, felt the birth of new worlds, sensed love permeating the cosmos. It was during this ceremony that the scars appeared, but then they weren't scars, but devices, tiny crystalline implants that embedded in their bodies, creating a permanent connection with the galactic consciousness network. These devices are a gift and responsibility, Sarah explained. They allow us to remain connected with them, to receive knowledge and guidance. But they also make us responsible for transmitting this knowledge to humanity. Several months after their return, the family began to manifest unusual abilities that became more pronounced with each passing day. These changes occurred gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, but soon became so obvious that they could no longer be ignored. Michael discovered that he could sense electromagnetic fields with amazing accuracy. Initially, this manifested as mild discomfort when near a microwave oven or Wi-Fi router, but gradually this sensitivity developed to such an extent that he could determine the location of any switched-on electrical device in the house, even when in another room. It's like an additional sense, he explained to doctors. I see electrical fields as colored auras around devices. A phone gives off blue luminescence, a computer bright white with red inclusions, and a microwave creates a pulsating orange cloud. This ability proved incredibly useful in his work. Michael could instantly diagnose problems in electronic systems, find faults in circuits, determine optimal placement of antennas and transmitters. His colleagues were amazed at how quickly he solved technical problems that previously required hours of testing and diagnostics. But proximity to powerful sources of electromagnetic radiation also began to cause him physical discomfort. High-voltage power lines gave him headaches, and visiting large data centers became almost unbearable due to the intensity of electromagnetic fields. Sarah developed phenomenal empathy that surpassed all known cases of human intuition. She could sense people's emotional states not only through personal contact, but also at considerable distances. Moreover, sometimes she could anticipate people's thoughts and reactions several seconds before they themselves realized them. It started with my students, Sarah recounted. I began to notice that I knew which children were upset or excited without even looking at them. Then I started feeling people's emotions in stores, banks, everywhere there were crowds. This ability revolutionized her approach to teaching. Sarah could instantly determine which child didn't understand the material, who needed support, and who was ready for more complex tasks. Her class began showing outstanding results, and Sarah's methods became studied by educators across the country. However, constantly sensing others' emotions proved exhausting. In crowds, Sarah experienced emotional overload from multiple simultaneous experiences of other people. She had to learn to filter these sensations, creating mental barriers to protect her own emotional state. Jacob began demonstrating mathematical abilities that bordered on the impossible. The boy who previously struggled with simple arithmetic could now mentally solve equations usually studied in university. Moreover, he began seeing mathematical patterns in the surrounding world that escaped adults' attention. Numbers are alive, he explained to his parents. Each number has its own shape, color, character. When I look at a tree, I see Fibonacci numbers in the arrangement of leaves. When I listen to music, I see mathematical functions creating harmony. His drawings became astonishing. Jacob created complex geometric patterns, fractal structures, multi-dimensional projections. Mathematicians from the local university were amazed by the precision and beauty of his work. Some of his drawings contained mathematical concepts that had not yet been officially discovered by science. At school, Jacob was transferred to a special program for gifted children, but even there his abilities exceeded all expectations. He began independently studying higher mathematics, quantum physics, string theory. His teachers often turned to him for help solving particularly complex problems. The youngest son, Ethan, acquired the ability to see in an extended light spectrum. Initially, this manifested as the ability to distinguish shades that other people didn't notice. Gradually, his vision expanded into infrared and ultraviolet ranges. The world is full of colors you don't see, the 7-year-old boy said. Flowers glow in the dark with beautiful patterns, and people are surrounded by multicolored clouds that change depending on their mood. Ethan's ability to see thermal radiation allowed him to detect problems invisible to ordinary eyes. He could notice incipient inflammation in human or animal bodies, find heat leaks in houses, identify electronic malfunctions by their thermal signature. This was especially pronounced at night. The boy could navigate in complete darkness, as if seeing everything in minute detail. He distinguished thermal traces left by people and animals, saw the flow of hot and cold water in pipes inside walls, could determine which rooms in the house someone had recently occupied. But Ethan's most striking ability was seeing what he called like people. Sometimes, especially at twilight or early morning, he saw transparent figures moving alongside ordinary people or independently of them. These beings were visible only to him, and he described them as kind and wise observers. They're everywhere, Ethan told his parents. They watch over us, help us, but most people don't notice them. They're very old and very kind. Sometimes they speak to me without words, explaining things I don't understand. All these abilities intensified when the family was together. Their scars glowed brighter, and paranormal abilities became more pronounced. It seemed that an energetic connection existed between family members that amplified each individual's gifts. Scientists from various fields of knowledge showed interest in the Carter family. The case was so unusual and well documented that even skeptically minded researchers could not ignore it. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a leading neurobiologist from Stanford University, headed a team of researchers studying changes in the family's brain. The results of their work were published in the prestigious journal Nature Neuroscience and caused a sensation in the scientific world. MRI scanning showed that all family members had undergone fundamental changes in brain structure. The number of neural connections had increased by an average of 35%, especially in areas responsible for intuition, spatial thinking, and sensory information processing. What we see in these scans should not be possible, Dr. Morgan stated at an international conference of neurobiologists. Such changes in brain structure usually occur over many years of intensive learning and training. Here they happened in a few days, and in the entire family simultaneously. Particularly interesting were changes in the hippocampus, the brain area responsible for memory and spatial orientation. In the Carter family, this area was developed much more than in ordinary people, which explained their amazing abilities for memorization and spatial orientation. New neural pathways were also discovered, connecting different brain areas in ways previously unobserved in humans. These connections allowed more efficient information processing and explained the family's paranormal abilities. Genetic research conducted by Dr. Robert Chon from the Genomics Institute at the National Institutes of Health yielded even more astonishing results. Gene sequences were discovered in all family members' DNA that had not been present in their medical records before the disappearance. These genetic sequences don't resemble anything known in the human genome, Dr. Chong explained to colleagues. They are stable, functional, and apparently responsible for the family's new abilities. But most striking, these genes are activated, although usually such sequences remain dormant. Analysis showed that the new genetic sequences encode proteins that improve nerve fiber conductivity, increase sensory organ sensitivity, and optimize brain cell metabolism. Essentially, the family had received a genetic upgrade that made them more advanced versions of ordinary humans. Blood studies revealed the presence of previously unknown protein compounds. These substances were not only non-toxic, but also performed important protective functions. They strengthened the immune system, slowed aging processes, and protected against radiation and toxin exposure. Dr. Maria Vasquez, an immunologist from the University of California, Los Angeles, conducted a detailed study of the family's immune system. Results showed that their bodies could resist diseases with an efficiency considered theoretically possible but never observed in practice. Their immune system functions like a perfectly tuned machine, Dr. Vasquez explained. It can instantly recognize and neutralize threats, from common cold viruses to cancer cells. Moreover, the system possesses learning and adaptation capabilities that surpass all known mechanisms. Psychological tests conducted by a team led by Dr. David Keller from Harvard University showed that the family suffered from no hallucinations, mental disorders, or traumatic syndromes. On the contrary, their mental health was excellent. Usually people who have experienced traumatic events show signs of post-traumatic stress, Dr. Keller noted. Here we see the opposite, significant improvement in psychological condition, reduced anxiety levels, increased emotional stability. Lie detector tests conducted by experienced FBI polygraphers revealed no signs of deception in the family's accounts. Their descriptions of events were consistent, detailed, and emotionally truthful. Of particular interest were measurements of bioelectrical activity in the scar areas. Dr. Robert Steinberg used the most modern equipment to analyze electromagnetic fields generated by these markings. The scars create a weak, but clearly definable electromagnetic field, he reported. The frequency of this field corresponds to resonant frequencies of the human brain in states of deep meditation. This might explain the family's unusual abilities. Moreover, it was discovered that the scars of all four family members generate synchronized electromagnetic pulses. Even when the family was in different buildings, their scars continued to pulse in unison, indicating the existence of some unknown type of connection. Attempts to recreate these effects under laboratory conditions were unsuccessful. Scientists could not understand how the tiny devices in the scars receive energy to function and how they maintain connection with each other over large distances. When the Carter family's story became public knowledge, the reaction was stormy and controversial. The first reports appeared in local news summaries as a story about the miraculous rescue of a missing family, but when details about their strange memories and unusual abilities began to surface, media interest took on a completely different character. Television channels competed to invite the family for interviews. CNN, Fox News, NBC, everyone wanted to get the exclusive story. Offers for documentary filming and even feature films came in daily. Publishers offered million-dollar contracts for the rights to a book about their experience. But society's reaction was far from unanimous. Skeptics, led by well-known paranormal debunker Dr. Michael Shermer, claimed that this was either an elaborate hoax or the result of collective psychosis caused by the stress of disappearance. There is not a single piece of physical evidence of extraterrestrial contact, Dr. Shermer declared in the pages of Skeptical Inquirer magazine. All we have are testimonies from people who could have experienced hallucinations or false memories caused by traumatic experience. However, when the results of medical research became known to the scientific community, many skeptics were forced to reconsider their positions. Genetic changes, new proteins in blood, structural brain changes, all this was too concrete and measurable to be explained by psychological factors alone. Religious groups were also divided in their opinions. Some conservative Christian organizations saw the events as the work of dark forces or a test of faith. Pastor Gerald Falwell Jr. publicly stated that any contacts with so-called aliens are Satan's deception, designed to distract people from true faith. On the other hand, more liberal religious leaders perceived the family's story as evidence of the boundlessness of divine creation. Bishop John Spong of the Episcopal Church stated, "If God created an infinite universe, it would be arrogant to assume that life exists only on Earth. Perhaps the Carter family witnessed a divine plan that exceeds our understanding." The UFO community met the story with both enthusiasm and caution. Many UFO researchers considered the Carter case one of the most convincing evidence of extraterrestrial life. Dr. Stanton Friedman, a veteran of ufology with 50 years of experience, called it the Rosetta Stone of modern ufology. "We have multiple witnesses, medical evidence, physical changes in bodies," Friedman enumerated. This is exactly the type of evidence we lacked for convincing proof of the reality of the UFO phenomenon. However, even within the UFO community, there were disagreements. Some researchers believed that too much publicity could harm the reputation of a field that already suffered from lack of scientific recognition. They called for more careful and methodical study of the case. The family faced enormous pressure from media and the public. Reporters besieged their house 24 hours a day. The phone rang incessantly. Journalists from different countries called, researchers, curious citizens, religious preachers, and even people claiming they had similar experiences. The mailbox overflowed with letters. Some people wrote words of support and gratitude for the courage to tell their story. Others sent religious tracts and warnings about demonic deception. Still others shared their own stories of contacts with unidentified objects. It was especially hard for the children. At school, classmates treated Jacob and Ethan as celebrities or outcasts, depending on their parents' opinions. Some children admired the brothers, asked them to tell about the star people, dreamed of meeting aliens themselves. Others avoided them, frightened by parents' stories about demonic influence. Teachers didn't know how to react to the boys' new abilities. Mathematical geniuses had appeared in schools before, but Jacob's abilities went beyond ordinary giftedness. When the 10-year-old boy began correcting errors in algebra textbooks and explaining quantum physics concepts, the school administration was stumped. Ethan was referred to the school psychologist after he several times saw health problems in teachers and classmates. When his warnings about an impending illness in the math teacher proved accurate, the school administration didn't know whether to rejoice or worry. The Carter family's story remains one of the most mysterious and well-documented cases in modern ufology. Several years have passed since their abduction, but the influence of this event continues to grow, affecting more and more aspects of human life. Regardless of whether you believe in the reality of their experiences or consider what happened to be the result of an unknown natural or scientific phenomenon, it cannot be denied that something extraordinary truly happened to these people. Their physical and psychological changes, confirmed by multiple scientific studies, open new horizons for understanding the possibilities of the human body and consciousness. The Carter family became a symbol of hope for many people who had lost faith in humanity's future. Their story shows that we are not alone in the universe, that there are forces ready to help us overcome crises and evolve into a wiser and more harmonious civilization. Perhaps the Carter family are harbingers of what people might become in the future. Their abilities, their understanding of cosmic unity, their mission of serving the common good, all this might be a glimpse of the path that awaits our species in its development. Or perhaps they simply witnessed the first official contact with a civilization that surpassed us in development by millions of years. A civilization that learned to live in harmony with the cosmos and is ready to share its knowledge with younger brothers in mind. In any case, their story continues to inspire scientists, philosophers, artists, and all those who believe that the universe is full of wonders we are only beginning to understand. It forces us to reconsider our place in space, our relationships with each other, and our responsibility to future generations. The scars on their bodies continue to glow at night, reminding us that somewhere among the stars there are those who know of our existence and care about our development. And perhaps someday they will return, not as abductors, but as teachers, ready to help humanity take the next step in its cosmic evolution. To this day, the Carter family continues their work preparing humanity for this great transition. Every clear night, they go out to the desert, direct their signals to the stars, and wait, because they know their story is far from over. It's only beginning. And who knows, perhaps reading these lines, you too will feel the call of distant stars. Perhaps something will happen in your life that will change not only your understanding of reality, but the fate of all humanity. For according to the Carter family, we are all connected by invisible threads of cosmic consciousness, and each of us plays our role in the great symphony of mind evolution in the universe. Time will tell whether the skeptics who consider this story fantasy were right, or whether the Carter family truly opened the door to a new era of human history. But one thing is certain, their experience forces us to raise our eyes to the stars and think about what awaits us in the infinite expanses of space. And there, high in the night sky above Arizona, the stars continue to shine, keeping secrets that perhaps will soon cease to be secrets. And the Carter family continues their mission to be a bridge between Earth and sky, between present and future, between humanity and the cosmos.